Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibilityman. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Sammie Walker Herrera. She's a public speaking and confidence coach. Her clients have included Amazon, IBM, and the Microsoft Corporation. She helps leaders improve their impromptu speaking skills, as well as their interviewing techniques. Sammie is also a professional speaker and has given talks at Carrier Corporation and various departments at Carnegie Mellon University. She's a writer and a co-author of chapters in books. She's the founder of Speak Y'all and is a YouTube influencer. She is a dancer, a comedian. She does musical improv, and she is a vegan aficionado. Sammie, you are a one-woman band. Welcome to the show today.
Stephen, thank you so much for this introduction. I think this is the most fun I've ever had being introduced.
That's awesome. Look, I'm so excited to be with you. I like what you're doing. But first, this reminder to our listeners and our viewers, your support matters. Follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Sammie, look, you got a lot going on. So I got to ask you, did you see this coming when you were, let's say, in high school?
In high school? In high school, I didn't really consider myself much of a leader, if you will. The high school I went to was pretty small. There was about maybe total 250 students, and there were about 3 or 4 clubs. And ironically, I did lead one of the clubs in my final year, my senior year of high school, which was related to animal advocacy. And that was even before I was vegan. I just really loved volunteering at the local animal shelter. But for me, I really didn't consider myself much of a leader because I had a lot of a comparison mindset. Oh, this person is more of a leader. Oh, this person got a leadership award, or they were selected for a leadership society I've never heard of before. I guess I'm not really a leader. And so for me, I was highly involved. I was in a lot of activities, but I didn't consider myself a leader because I really thought it had to be related to a title. And now that, for example, even doing musical improv, I'm not the teacher. I'm not the head of musical improv, but I am someone who really loves to go further in my improv education. And I feel like I take the lead when I invite folks to my shows or I invite folks up on stage.
That's fantastic. So when did you begin to break out, so to speak, and to evolve into doing some of the things you're doing now?
Yeah, I think what really helped me break out of my shell, if you will, I was never an introvert in my life, but there were times when I was shy. And I think that's something that a lot of people have a misconception about is, oh, if you're an introvert, that means you're shy. No, you can be an extrovert and shy. You love connecting with people, perhaps having a lot of social engagements, having a lot of friends, but maybe you don't want to be the center stage. And I think for me, being center stage came with a lot more confidence for me when I attended Carnegie Mellon for my undergraduate education, when I realized, wow, there's so many opportunities. So I moved from 3 or 4 clubs to 200 or so. And I realized that there's just a space for everyone's interests. And so I got involved pretty quickly. The first day I joined the Kilty band and joined the color guard. So a lot of the flag wavers during the football games. I joined a sorority in my first semester as well. And I even started working toward the end of my freshman year or first year, moving into the Career Center at CMU, as well as later into the next year, I was a resident assistant. So slowly but surely, I feel that as I built my confidence and I felt that there was more of a path and there was more of a space for me and my interests, that it was okay to dip my toe into more of the waters of both informal as well as formal leadership.
So now, but when you went to college, you didn't gravitate toward communication per se. You graduated. What was your undergraduate major?
Yeah, I had 2. So one was psychology, and that was a bit more of a focus on the clinical psychology, cognitive psychology. And my second major was Hispanic studies, which is more of a cultural degree. So cultural education, communication in the sense of speaking Spanish for all of the advanced level classes. So there's a communication component there, but not in the same way of going up to speak or making sure that it was more about making sure I was saying what was right correctly in that the grammar of Spanish than it was about really putting my voice out there all the time.
Uh-huh. So now you said but your primary major was psychology. And on the clinical side, so were you thinking of becoming like a clinical psychologist, a therapist, or something like that?
I was exploring that path. And for a bit, I had an internship at a psychiatric hospital based here in Pittsburgh in an outpatient. And so I took intakes for different clients as well as their parents, since it was children who were part of that program. And then I also, related to my Hispanic studies degree, translated a cognitive behavioral therapy manual from English to Spanish. So ironically, even that role was a bit more communication focused, and it was about making sure that therapists in states where there were a lot of Spanish speakers like New York, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, had the ability to use that same guide with Spanish speaking clients.
That sounds good. Then but right now there's a big emphasis on communication and public speaking. What opened that door for you? How did it come about for you?
What started opening the door for me was looking back to my previous experiences and realizing how often I found so much joy in giving workshops. I do one-on-one coaching with many clients on public speaking. I've done group coaching. I do one-on-one coaching with students, graduates, alum for career coaching. But I realized something that brings me a lot of joy is being on the screen here or being in person and really educating and hosting a workshop, which is a balance of how do I portray as much relevant information without overwhelming people, but also in some ways entertaining and engaging folks. Because I could just have a slide that has every single service that a career center has. Or for example, I could be teaching about confidence in public speaking and make it one slide with all the information on it, but it's not really going to leave people in a sense that where they learned and where they, for example, would encourage other people to participate. I think that is a big measure of whether or not the message there landed is, are they able to communicate it in a short amount of time to another person? So I didn't really consider myself a public speaker. I was trained by a good friend of mine who was my business coach when I first started career coaching. And he had been in Toastmasters for many years, won multiple competitions, and wanted to become a public speaking coach more formally and brought me onto the team with him. And so working with him and training in that and looking back to my previous experiences and realizing some of the time I felt the most joy in my work was when I was up in front of folks, teaching, engaging, connecting. It put it all together and it made me realize that if coaching is an industry, which it is, coaching and professional training, there are so many aspects to coaching, right? There's people who are fitness coaches, style coaches, life coaches, career, public speaking. And I have centered my career around coaching. And I recognize that throughout my career, it can evolve and grow. And I can still be a coach in many different expert areas. And so for right now, mine are career clarity and public speaking confidence.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I think you found your niche, right? I think that's your gift, actually. Now, I'm going to approach public speaking and I want to spend some time with it. But first, why do you suppose, and I'm saying this because I think that it is, so many people are afraid of taking the stage to do public speaking. Why do you suppose that scares so many people?
It's a huge fear, right? When we talk about public speaking fear, we often liken it to that fear of heights or fear of spiders, or we remember that stat where I don't even know where it came, where public speaking is the second biggest fear in the US. One area, I think, why it produces so much of that anxiety or produces so much of that fear is that fear of judgment from other people, whether it's people one knows, whether it's their superiors, so people who can make decisions about their next path, their promotion, their leadership, getting a specific job, but then also fear from strangers. You may have seen, Stephen, where some folks that you've connected with, it's totally fine if they speak to people they know, but if it's strangers, complete fear. And you can also see it vice versa. Some people don't care talking to strangers. They're like, man, they don't mean anything in my life, but would be terrified to speak in front of their family. And so I feel the reason why people may be scared for this group or that group or this group is just that fear of judgment and what that judgment will do to them, right? Will it hurt someone's reputation and they won't be able to be considered an expert? Maybe they won't get jobs or interviews. Maybe they'll just look silly. Maybe that's the one time they tried, they didn't feel like they did well, and they used that as the quote unquote evidence to say they never needed to do that again. And a lot of folks that I've worked with have done that. They said, you know what, I tried this one time, or I had an experience when I was younger where I felt humiliated, I felt embarrassed, I felt stressed out. And now the only reason I'm going into public speaking coaching is because it's impacting my career path, or it's impacting my personal professional growth. So I feel that that fear of judgment, that fear of the consequences of that judgment, both in the external world, but then also internally, to never try again, is what keeps people from going on stage, so to speak.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm glad you put it that way, because once you take the stage or once you open your mouth to speak, you are exposed, whether there's one person listening or a group listening. Let's share this real quickly. I was at an event for my sister's husband my brother-in-law last week, and her daughter, when she took the mic, she said, well, I don't speak in public, but Sammie, the young lady, has the most beautiful voice. It comes out naturally. It's like she has a gift to share, but she's afraid to speak. So I'm glad you're doing what you do. And you have one of those natural speaking voices as well. Glad you're doing what you do. Look, but let me go down this road now. You do improvisations, improv. Why did you get into improvs and musical improvs and the like?
Yeah, I started improv after I'd heard about it a couple of times. I feel like I'm the type of person who needs to hear about something multiple times, and then I'll think, oh, okay, maybe I'll try it. And I've also had many friends who've told me, Sammie, you need to do stand-up comedy. You're so funny. You need to do stand-up. And I never felt stand-up resonated with me as much, not in the sense of I'm scared to go be on stage. Like, I'm scared people will judge me. I mean, there's a little bit of that nervousness there, right? But not really that fear that keeps me from it. I just felt that the stand-up format of having everything memorized, of building out stories, if you will, of trying and testing out stories multiple times at 5-minute open mics, things like that, was just not something I was very interested in. So after a buddy of mine, Steven, recommended I try out improv, he tried out improv because he wanted to build his confidence. And I realized, wow, this can be a way not only I can personally grow and still build my confidence. And of course, as a confidence coach, that's something I still work on to this day, because it's a journey, it's growth, it's progress. But I thought, wow, maybe some of the things I learned from my improv education are exercises or stories or mindsets that I can bring to my public speaking coaching, to my clients. And so this past Saturday, I graduated from level 2 at Steel City Improv.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I started musical improv, which is an elective through the theater where we make up songs and pretty much make up musicals. So by the end, when we're doing our class show, it's going to be a couple musicals that we create. So the opening song, building out characters, conflict, resolution, closing song, things like that. And we'll have no idea what we're singing about until we get there that day and someone highlights a suggestion from the audience.
That's a wonderful way to boost not only your confidence, but also improve your skills along the way as well. So is it important? Is it public speaking? Is this an important skill for not only professionals, but for people to have? What do you think?
Overall, it's definitely a life skill. Now, for example, when you're posting things on LinkedIn, right, the context is professional skills. This needs to have a blazer on it, that type of formality, if you will. But it definitely is a life skill. And I would say most of the clients I work with, when I ask them what are the challenges they're facing in their speaking, they start off regarding work, but then they also talk about how building their communication skills would help them connect more to other people in their life. So I've worked with clients who said, I feel a little bit anxious networking when it comes professionally, but I also dance, but I feel awkward when it comes to talking to people at socials. I want to be able to build more relationships. And even, for example, another person I worked with, Walter, he talked about how as he was learning different activities and practices through public speaking, which can feel a bit like improv as well, he started doing these practices. So for example, generating a random word and then asking one of his children to do a speech based on that word. And he got to connect with his children a lot more by practicing these activities. And one thing I really value in being a coach is that I want to coach folks to be able to replace me with themselves. I want them to be able to listen to their own speaking, whether right in the moment or a recording of their speaking, and say, this is what I can improve. I did really well on this. Okay, next time I'm going to try doing this, so that they can coach themselves and it becomes a skill and it becomes a habit that they have for the rest of their lives. Again, for both the professional life and as well as their personal life, where they can slowly but surely even teach folks that they manage or teach their own children how to speak better and really emphasize their voice.
Yeah. So do you think speaking, being able to speak well, being able to address one person or more is important in a professional's growth and development at work? Is this an important skill for leadership? And if so, why?
Let me tell you a story about that to illustrate. I've recently been working with someone who is the co-founder of an oil and gas company. And he founded the organization with two other people, and his two co-founders he would consider both extroverts and who both love to step forward, step in front, and highlight their thoughts in meetings. And it was becoming a point where he didn't really believe he needed to do much with his speaking or communication, but slowly and surely, his co-founders were saying, hey, Suraj, like, do you have anything else you want to share? It was after every single meeting they were in, they always asked right at the end, oh, do you have anything to share? Oh, do you have anything to share? That repetition of, oh my gosh, they're looking for something from me. But it's not even looking for something from me as like a participation points, right? It's they really value something I have to say. They want to make sure my voice is elevated in this organization. And he is just as much a co-founder as they are, right? And so I think having that supportive environment helped him understand, like, hey, this is something I need to do, because part of public speaking isn't just being behind a podium. It's not always being on the TEDx stage. Some of it is speaking up in meetings and being able to relay reports in a short, concise, direct way to one's superiors or executives in one's company who don't have that much time to listen. So with public speaking, I think a big part of it is less about the image or sounding amazing or having perfect grammar or one's pacing being perfect, but it's that sense of, I realize now that people have been waiting for me to speak up. They've either been asking me to speak up or they've just been waiting, and now I feel is my time.
That's also a leadership lesson that I gather from what you've just said. Whoever asked this person sitting in the room if he had anything else to say was exhibiting leadership skills, bringing other voices to the table. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So comedy, what type of comedy? Can you tell us about that again? About what type of comedy do you try to do? Or do you do, not only try to do?
Yeah, so it's specifically improv comedy. So it's long form improv comedy, meaning that at least right now, what I've learned in both level 1 and 2 is having 2 or 3 people on stage, someone initiating a scene, meaning they come in and they establish a relationship. So, hey, neighbor. Okay, now I know we're neighbors. That gives me some information. I can't believe I saw you at the library today. Okay, now we're at the library. That's good to know. And then establishing like an emotion. And you know how much I hate librarians. So now we've established that these people are neighbors to each other. They're at the library and this person hates librarians. Maybe part of the comedy is the other person doesn't hate librarians or really loves librarians or also really hates librarians. And maybe both of them start yelling in the library. Maybe a librarian passes by, which is another person coming in. And then once you really hit the crescendo or the big laugh point of that scene, someone else from our team will run across the stage and end it. And then a new scene will start in the next couple seconds.
Yeah. I like it. That
It's
sounds
great.
like fun. Sounds like a lot of
It's
fun.
so fun.
Okay. Yeah. So okay, let's look at your public speaking, Speak Y'all company,
Mhm.
consulting company. So how do you help an executive develop, let's say his public speaking skills? Someone comes to you and say, look, I would like to be more confident as a public speaker. Can you help me?
So what does that process look like to
Yeah, what
connect
does that look like?
through
Yes.
coaching?
Mhm.
Yes. I always host a free consultation with anybody who's interested in public speaking support. And the reason for this is that I don't host a blanket coaching. It is very personalized. And for example, I've worked with folks who their speaking is fantastic. Their speaking is great. They don't really have filler words or any of those needing to work on their speaking polish issues like speaking too fast, difficult pacing, not enunciating, speaking too soft, things like that. But it's more of the fear component. So then I think about, okay, how can I build in more exercises related to that versus someone who, yeah, maybe they do have a bit more of the, when I feel pressure, I start losing my composure. I start sweating. I start getting nervous. I do have filler words. I'm speaking super fast, things like that. And that tells me, okay, let's work on those individual components and the fear component. So I have a consultation with folks just because I want to make sure that we're a good fit. So I do a bit of a coaching practice, if you will. So I simulate what some direct coaching will look like and I give them feedback. First, positive on what their speaking strengths are, because I want people leaving knowing that they have speaking strengths, because every single person does. And I run a very strengths focused coaching process to make sure that we're really focusing on what you're doing well and continuing to build, but then also the things that can be really improved on, and even suggesting what to work on first. What would be something that we can work on that would have the greatest impact for the first few days? Mm-hmm. So we do that. And then I work with folks individually. I've also done some group programming, but predominantly at the moment, I'm working with folks individually, usually over 4 weeks. And the first week, again, it can really depend on the person, but for a lot of folks, the first week is really just a lot more of the polish, slowing down, addressing filler words, noticing if folks are thinking too much and they're not, and they're judging themselves as they're speaking. So how do we get someone to start speaking if they're just too in their head, if you will? And then moving on to gestures, how to use the body, how to use one's arms, how to use the face to emote what they're saying. I can imagine, Stephen, or anyone listening, you've heard someone say, we're really excited that our new hire is here. And that's probably not that they're not excited. It's maybe they're a little nervous giving that announcement.
Right.
But how we notice like the emotions and the gestures and the words don't work together, that can be something that really strongly impacts the message that goes, right? Maybe that impacts that hire and says, oh my gosh, are they excited for me to be here, right? So working on a lot more of that body language. The next week, I often work on a lot more regarding confidence and building in more challenge in our practice, because something I get asked quite a lot is, hey, the thing I'm nervous about in public speaking is speaking in front of a large group. We're working one-on-one. How are we going to address this? And what I find with speaking to a large group, or for example, even speaking to one person, but that person causes so much stress because they're their boss or they're their boss's boss, or it's an investor they're speaking to and they're giving a pitch, it's about the pressure. It's between 40 people and 50 people, there's not an increase of pressure. Maybe 40 to 200, there's like a bit more of a fear, if you will. But I find it's more about that pressure that's increasing. So how can I create and foster public speaking exercises that build up more and more challenge and build up more and more pressure so that folks are used to the pressure and that they're able to navigate that a lot more when it comes to work or personal situations?
Mm-hmm. Do you have people come to you and say, I don't have any confidence? I mean, not that they want to make you a therapist, but they're just saying, my confidence is low. Can you help me? Or is
Yes,
it always connected, to public speaking is what I'm trying to ask you.
that's a really good point. And the way I view it is that confidence can be built and supported through public speaking. But I understand what you're saying is, is there a way to address that without it being directly tied to public speaking? And for me, it's been less of, oh, I don't really have confidence, I don't know what to do, because public speaking is something that just very naturally and very blanket for a lot of people impacts people's confidence. Because I do connect with people who say, I'm really confident when I'm speaking to my peers. I'm really confident as a manager speaking to the people I manage. Now, I'm not confident when different context. I'm not confident when I'm at networking events. I'm not confident when it's the annual evaluation, those kinds of things. And so I think people naturally find me as a public speaking coach first, and then they see that that can really be building and supporting their confidence.
Yeah, I get it. I get it, Sammie. What I hear you say is that as a person's public speaking skills improve, it could be a big confidence booster. Is that about right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And we talk quite a lot about mindset as well, because I also host some career clarity. And a lot of that is related to confidence. Am I confident that I'm really an expert? Am I confident that the path I've taken is going to take me into the next place I want to go? Am I confident the place I think I want to go is where I want to go? And so by having a lot of really good questions, that's a big focus of coaching, right? Is asking good questions to help folks lead to their next step. A lot of the confidence is built by some things that are related to public speaking, like starting conversations with people, emailing people, wanting to have an informational interview, asking good questions to people you have informational interviews with to see whether or not that's the right path, and then having the confidence to say no to things that you thought maybe you wanted to do, but now that you have more clarity, you're taking a new step, which has some risk, but can often have so many more rewards associated with it.
Yeah. Have you had a client, come to you, a client that you've worked with, obviously, come to you and say to you, I have a big speaking engagement coming up at the company, and they come back to report, Sammie, I knocked it out of the park. Have you had someone say that to you? Or something akin to that?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that. I have a huge smile on my face for the folks who are just listening audio to the podcast. And it's that same person I've worked with, that co-founder of the oil and gas company, Suraj. He originally came to me because he wanted to speak to his employees at the annual Christmas party. And last year, he was supposed to be speaking, but he asked someone else in the company, hey, can you please do this? Can you please do this? I'm not ready, but I'll be ready next year. And this past December became next year. And he looked on LinkedIn, he typed in public speaking coach, and I was the second person who popped up, which I'm really grateful to the LinkedIn algorithm for connecting us. So within our 4 weeks of coaching, it was at the end of the second week where he was addressing his employees before they were going off for holiday. And we practiced not only what I traditionally practice with folks in the first week, speaking, delivery, and polish, but I made sure in our individualized coaching that he practiced his speech a few times with me, since it was about 5 minutes. We practiced it multiple times. He practiced it on himself multiple times as well, recorded it, gave some feedback. And I heard from him on Monday, following that Friday, and he was so excited to report back that not only did multiple employees come up to him afterwards saying that was great, but his co-founders and even his wife and his friends who had invited him said, wow, that was fantastic. You did an amazing job. That was a lot of confidence. That was a lot of authority, and we're really proud of you. So it was excellent that he not only shared that with his company, but he got to share that with his loved ones.
That's fantastic. That's a great story. How would you respond to a client who says to you, and I'm not going to ask you if you've had this experience, but a client who says to you, Sammie, I bombed it. I just didn't do well. What would you say to that client?
Stephen, the way I think about this a lot is that I find that people are way harder on themselves than they even think they are. So the first thing I do is I validate the fact that they don't feel good about what just happened. They don't feel good about having spoken. And I validate that with saying something like, I'm so sorry to hear that you didn't feel like you did so well. And you mentioned that you bombed. I would love to hear more about how I can be helpful as we move forward. Can you tell me more about the experience? So I would want to get more information because, for example, that quote unquote bombing, it really could be I completely blanked out on stage. I had to walk off. I couldn't finish my speech. But for the most part, when I see that my clients aren't giving themselves good feedback after a practice and I watch the practice myself, what I'm seeing is that they're just being way too hard on themselves. And if they think they bombed, it's because they weren't perfect. Like I had a few filler words here. I didn't say this one thing I wanted to say. And the funny thing about that, Stephen, is no one in the audience would know that you wanted to say something else or add something because they don't have the script in front of them, or they don't know what you were going to say anyway, right? But that sense of failure, I didn't say everything that I wanted. Maybe I spoke a little bit longer. I didn't close exactly the way I wanted. Honestly, most of the time when I have clients say, like, I just didn't feel so good about this practice, I review it, I highlight the things that, yes, we can improve, but for the most part, we have a conversation about what does good speaking look like and how can we be more kind and gracious to ourselves as we're going through a process. Because when you don't know you're bad at something, like when I first started improv and I was just running on stage and I was having laughs and having fun, it was fine. But once I started getting more and more notes and I started seeing more patterns in improv, I realized, oh my goodness, like I have a lot more to learn. Like that learning path becomes illuminated. And it's very easy to see, oh my gosh, like I'm not as good as I thought I was. Oh my gosh. And it's not like my skill level changed. It's not like I got worse in a day or something like that. It's that now I know and I have an awareness of what I'm not good at. And with that awareness, that's where people drop off sometimes. Without the accountability of having a coach, a lot of people will get to the point where they realize they have a lot to learn and then they quit learning. But when you have that coach and you have that accountability as well as expert feedback, it's a lot easier to have that mindset conversation about, hey, you're now aware. There's a lot of things that you can work on, but we're working on them systematically together. And that's where the confidence is going to be won. That's where confidence is earned, not given.
Yeah, I guess a lot of us can get into trouble thinking we are God. That is, we want to be perfect. What you're saying, we don't have to be perfect, as you've said earlier. So, the more I've listened to you, I see this, it's like this synchronicity between your training in psychology, especially on the clinical side, and what you do now. Do you see that more of your background in psychology shows up in the way you work with people?
I love that you asked that too. I just recently had someone who is a student at my alma mater reach out to me specifically through like the alumni networking channel, being like, please tell me more about your psychology career. Like, it's obvious you're using it now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is it obvious that I'm using it now? So the way I think about it quite a lot is I don't use like diagnostics. Like I don't use the DSM-5. So the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which psychologists and therapists use to diagnose diseases. Like I don't use things like that, but I do look toward biases sometimes. Like for example, confirmation bias comes up a lot when it comes to folks' fear of public speaking. So for anyone listening, confirmation bias is looking specifically for evidence of something that you already believe so that can strengthen that belief. So for example, like you just said, someone saying, oh, I bombed. Well, if they watch their recording, but they're only picking out the things they did wrong, then that's confirmation bias of, oh, well, I view myself as a bad speaker. I watched this recording of myself. I noted only the poor things, so that reinforces my belief of being a bad speaker. It's really hard to change some of those beliefs we have about ourselves. I'm shy, I'm an introvert, which there's no problem being an introvert, but there's a problem if being an introvert to oneself means, oh, that means I'm a bad speaker, because some of the best public speakers out there are introverts, because introverts have a keen knack for listening, and listening is what allows people to feel heard and allows people to build amazing stories that they can relay as public speakers as well.
Yeah. So in looking at your profile and just studying you a little bit, because you got a pretty good digital footprint out there. I saw something about executive presence.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, what is that? Can you tell us what that is and how do you help someone cultivate executive presence?
Mm. Executive presence is it's more than the appearance, but it's really the gravitas of being a leader. That feeling that people have that while I'm on screen, while folks are listening to me, when I'm in a meeting room or in my office, that says, okay, this person knows what she's doing. This person is an expert. This person is a leader. And that helps me follow along what they're saying because of the influence. So when we think about executive presence, there's multiple components to it. There is often what people feel like, oh, okay, well, executive presence is my clothes or my makeup or how I look as a professional. And that helps. That definitely, if it's a formal environment, formal clothes. If it's a business smart environment, business smart clothes, kind of matching that environment. But it's a lot more than the outward appearance. It's how one carries oneself. And in some ways, too, it's even more than just speaking. It's the whole package. It's the whole gravitas of one's carrying oneself. And so the way I work with folks on executive presence is I build out the strengths that I already notice in one speaking. There are some people that I've coached who just already sound like an authority. Like their voice just has this authoritative tone to it. There's some folks who have a tonality to them, and I feel like you're one of them, who, when you hear them, it just lends to the sense of trust. And not everybody has a tonality like that. For example, I would say my tonality, well, hopefully people trust me, right? But it's probably less of trust and maybe one more of like excitement or engagement or optimism, like that sense of like punchy or like wearing yellow and things like that, right? And that's okay. So how do we emphasize one's tonality? And then how do we create that gravitas with how someone speaks? And again, it's less about the look of someone's makeup, someone's clothes, someone's outfit choices, but more about when I speak, am I all congruent? Is what I'm saying matching what what my facial expressions are, what my gestures are? Is it all coming together? And a lot of folks who have more of that executive presence or gravitas, they speak slower. And I don't tell my clients, you just need to speak slower. What I work with my clients on is building a range. Most people tend to speak faster than maybe they want. And speaking fast can be helpful. There may be times where you're really communicating. One time you were super hurried and your deadline was coming up. So speaking fast works versus speaking really slow can help drive the message at the end of a TED Talk.
Yeah.
It's about building the range so someone can use the fast-paced voice when they need and the slow-paced voice. And for most of the time with a client, again, maybe they're speaking here and we bring them down just a little bit. So there's just a bit more of that. I'm waiting to hear what you say because I'm really interested in what you have to say next.
There's some skill development in this executive presence is what I gained from you. Is there then a relationship between executive presence and leadership coaching?
I would say definitely. And I'm forgetting the researcher. I can send you the information so we can include it in the show notes, but there's a researcher who talked about 3 components to building, to rising in leadership or getting promotions. And it's called the pie model. There's performance, there is, I believe, image, and then there's exposure. And for most people, they believe, okay, it's performance. Like, I just need to do a really great job. If I do my job amazingly, then of course I'll be promoted. But performance is about 10% of that measurement. Because for a lot of folks making those hiring or promotion or leadership decisions, they're kind of expecting someone to do well in their job. But hopefully they do above and beyond as well. But often if someone is performing well, but no one knows about it, how would they gain that ability to have promotion by other people who are making those decisions? So image is about 30%. And I believe that's where a lot of that executive presence is coming in. Now, the last 60% is exposure. Now, how much exposure do people have to the work that you're doing? When you're doing work, do you show other people your updates? Do you work in teams so that other people can spread the word of your good work? Do you let your supervisor know regularly when you have accomplishments or you're speaking at a conference or that you started coaching so that you can really skill build? So it's really a big part of communication is in this exposure of taking the onus for one's own promotion and leveling up in leadership by owning your accomplishments, by owning what's going well and letting other people know, which again goes all the way back to something we talked about with fear of public speaking, is a fear of judgment and sometimes that fear of exposure. So as a fear of exposure is also a fear of leveling up or being recognized for one's own leadership in an organization. So building the confidence to let people know what you're doing, to communicate that well, to build the executive presence and gravitas, and then of course, do well in your job, all comes together.
Wow. Awesome. Got another question about communication before we move on from it.
Of course.
Okay with you? So your wheelhouse obviously includes a lot of tools as a communicator. And there's another one. No, I can't say that. I was going to say that I was surprised.
Okay.
But I'm not surprised. It's storytelling. And how does this figure? I know that as a speaker, and you are a professional speaker. Storytelling shows up there. But how does storytelling, as you work with people, show up?
First, it shows up as some clients come to me specifically because they want to become a storyteller. They want to tell stories. And for some people, like they hear telling stories, like, wow, that person's lying, like they're making up stories, things like that. It's like, no, how is someone finding a very meaningful way to communicate results, to communicate accomplishments, to communicate struggles and triumphs through stories? There's even folks who really focus on making sure not only do they make pie charts and graphs and Gantt charts, if you will, highlighting data or how long the duration of something is, but there's data storytelling that's key as well. What are the key takeaways we should be getting from certain data? Because that is something that can be considered very subjective as well. Like, are we choosing what we want to say about data? What's the narrative around this data? So we can make sure that we have a good sense of what we've learned, what those lessons learned, and then what the next steps are. So for clients, I usually work with, okay, the speaking polish and the confidence, because it's hard to go right into storytelling if someone's not confident speaking. But moving into storytelling, it's really thinking about structure. And most of speaking and most of improv, most of things that a lot of people say, like, I could never do that. Once you get more of a structure down and you practice that structure over and over, the more it becomes natural. And even if someone's feeling a lot of pressure and stress, they can come back to that structure. Storytelling is very similar. When we watch movies, especially let's say Disney movies, right? You see, okay, things are going well, people are introduced, there's the circumstance. Oh no, there's a conflict. Something's happening. Let's say we have the Lion King, right? So we have some lions, they're hanging out. Oh my gosh, conflict, like Mufasa is killed. Simba has to like leave, okay? He's figuring out his identity. He's figuring out whether he wants to come back to the pride. He sees that Scar is impacting like the pride and taking over. And then cure. What is the cure in the Lion King other than Rafiki coming in or Mufasa coming in and saying like, hey, I'm your mentor now. We're coming together. Let's make sure that we're taking care of our family. And then the resolution and the lessons learned, being able to come in to take his place in royalty, to save the pride, to support people, to punish the villains. Like we can see in so many different stories and movies and books that there is a structure that already exists there. And being able to know that structure feels like a cheat code, but being able to practice that structure builds in that learning so that it's something that we can come back to. And if someone's practiced enough or someone's listening to someone speak a lot, they'll be like, I think I'm starting to get a pattern here. And there's like a pattern of what you're saying. And so it takes a bit to get used to speaking with a structure there.
Mm-hmm. And we all have stories, right? Either at work or our personal lives or families. We all have stories to tell.
Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate that off the cuff and everyone was listening to me figure out how to tell the Lion King story. So hopefully that was good enough for any Disney fans out there.
That's fantastic. I love it. So in the beginning, you mentioned that in the beginning, I sense that nutrition is important to you. And you mentioned vegan, like you are a vegan. Why is that important to you? And when did you begin following this nutrition plan?
Yeah, for me, being vegan was related to health. It was related to nutrition. And as of the recording of this podcast, I've been vegan for about 4 years. So for me, becoming vegan was a lot less about, oh, I need to follow a perfect diet, or I need to show people how cool I am by being vegan, things like that. I talk about it on social media just because one of the ways I became vegan is I started hearing about it more and more. I told you that I heard about improv multiple times and that inspired me to join. Well, I heard about becoming vegan multiple times. And so that's what piqued that curiosity for me. But for me, becoming vegan was a lot more about independence. So I started becoming vegan when I was about 23, 24. And I recognized, hey, I want to see if I can set a big goal and then do it myself. Like, am I able to do something, plan it all by myself, figure it out, and get it all together? I really wanted to test my independence, my ability to get things done, to commit to something big, and seeing where it would take me without having like a good sense or without having results attached to it. Like, I didn't become vegan and I said, okay, this is gonna help me gain friends, or I'm gonna specifically gain or lose weight or something like that, right? It was just, I really want to try it out. I want to see if I can do it. And I do these little tests with myself sometimes. I'm going to join improv. I wonder if I can do it. And for me, it became just very easy. The way I think about veganism is it's a huge part of myself, and I will talk about it, but I also recognize it's a very personal journey. I do veganism different than maybe some other people. And I cook and eat different things. I also don't, for example, purchase like wool or leather or like animal products, things like that. But most of my friends are not vegan or vegetarian. And so it's not a lifestyle specifically say like people have to do. I mean, it's convenient when people around me are also vegetarian because we can share food, or that's fantastic. But for me, when I think about veganism and whenever like the anniversary of me being vegan comes up, it just reminds me of my strength. It reminds me of my independence, and it reminds me of my ability to get big things done. And since then, some big things I've done is start a business, right? Even though I knew that would be hard. And even beforehand, I thought that was something I could never do. Oh, I could never be vegan. I could never be a comedian. I could never salsa dance. I could never start a business. That is just one of the many reminders that there's so many things in my life I said I couldn't do. And by having more and more of those examples of the things that I know I did, inspired by the fact that I thought I couldn't do them, it makes me inspired to see what else will I try in my life.
Has your health benefited from being a vegan?
I definitely think so. Definitely, yeah, I don't have access to a lot of sweets or a lot of fast food. And for me, I think a big part of the health is just even that tranquility of cooking. Like, I find cooking itself is a lot of self-care. And part of it is, yes, the nutritious food I'm cooking, but also building that habit of like making sure I'm making my own food, making sure I'm having lunches and dinners and things like that. And so I think it's a cornerstone of a healthy life. Again, not just from the food I'm eating, providing nutrition, but it becoming a habit of cooking, of sharing recipes, of sharing my food with other folks that have just made my life a lot more well-rounded.
I like it. I like it. I like hearing from people who eat live foods or, plants and that kind of thing, more so than other kinds of foods. Anyway,
Mm.
look, we've talked about a lot today, but I got one more question for you. And that is there anything you want to share with us that I have not asked you already?
Ooh, good question there, Possibilityman. Let's see, what would I like to share? I want to share with folks that, and this might be more of an echo of something I said earlier, but if you don't think you have public speaking strengths, you do. There is something that you don't know that you're doing really well, and it can be very subtle. Again, the number of times I've told people, wow, your volume is really great. And they're like, what? I thought I was so quiet. I'm like, no, this is a great volume, and it's communicating to me that you're comfortable in what you're doing. The way I think about nervousness, if you will, is I don't look at someone and say, you're nervous, you're not nervous. What I say is your voice is projecting confidence, but your hands going like this, like your fingers intertwining in stress, that's showing nervousness. And additionally, I have so many people who ask me like, oh my gosh, Sammie, that must be so convenient or so helpful or so good that you never get nervous speaking. That's not true. I don't know where people came up with that. Maybe I need to like post it or share that more, but I do get nervous before speaking. I get a little bit nervous before each time I speak. And a big part of nervousness is that sense of caring. Again, it's not just the caring about how do I look? Do I look good? Am I going to say the right things? Am I going to say the wrong things? Does this need to be edited? No, it's I care about sharing the expertise I've built with others. I don't know who this will go to, and I really hope it goes to the right people who are going to listen to this message and that it helps them, right? So I do get a bit nervous, but it's about managing one's nerves so that they don't go too awry. And it's also accepting that the nervousness we feel at the start is about that true care and that true sense of giving. Like, I'm ready to give, but I feel a little bit nervous. That's okay. What I'm doing is going to serve a really strong benefit. And so I'm okay putting my voice out there.
I love it. Sammie, wonderful. You've been a great guest. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay. You've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Sammie Walker Herrera. This is Stephen Middleton, your host, with a reminder to follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Until next time, good day. You are not alone, just keep on.